Irashaimase! Hello and welcome to Fataris' Kitchen. I'm your host, Chef Fataris. It's time once again for Shoot 'em Up Saturday, and on the menu this week we have Risk System, a shoot 'em up with the unique bullet grazing mechanic. What kind of taste will it have? Let's get cooking and find out. From developer Newt Industries, Risk System released on the Xbox One and the PC earlier this year. Now, in July of 2021, it's available for the Nintendo Switch, and that's the version we're looking at today. So this is a shoot 'em up that can be best described by summing up its main mechanic, all about grazing bullets. So there's a high risk, high reward system where you get benefits from grazing enemy bullets. And at times it almost feels like it's a puzzle game, just trying to master this one mechanic to get the most out of this game. So if you like that kind of system, this is one that I encourage you check out. So here we find ourselves at the main menu. You can start a game and you can also continue from any stage you've gotten to. There's also leaderboards, options, and there are a couple interesting options that I'll talk about as we get into the gameplay itself, and then files. Files has a couple interesting things under there. There's the pilot manual, which is basically a light tutorial, pilot statistics, and personnel files for the story that the game has. Before I go any further, just a real quick warning. There are some screens that can be hard to look at, as well as some flashing. So if that's something that's a problem for you, then you might want to maybe take a pass on the rest of this video and possibly even this game. There's also screen shake that I'd like disabled, but that's my usual preference. So starting the game, we're taken to this virtual Link Connect where we're basically starting up the gameplay and kind of being shown a couple of the mechanics. So you have an upward barrel roll and a downward barrel roll. Those basically act as dodges. And then the all-important barrier breaker, which I'll get to a little bit here in a moment. The game has a couple interesting options turned on and off by default. So what's on by default? Auto fire. There's an interesting auto fire mechanic where if your ship happens to be horizontally lined up with with an enemy ship, at that point you'll fire your shot. Turned off, it is just you fire by pressing a button. In addition to the firing, we have our upward dodge, our downward dodge, and then there's that barrier. The barrier charges up in two ways. It does charge up over time. It's that B meter you see there at the bottom, but the core mechanic of the game, as I mentioned, is a bullet graze system. So let's get some enemies on screen, but rather than destroying them, let's let them take some shots at us and we can graze their bullets. So you see that there's that orb that surrounds our ship. There's two things going on when that orb surrounds our ship. So we can, we're building up meter for our barrier break, as well as we also have a stronger shot when that orb is absorbing enemy energy from the enemy bullets. Basically this parasitic energy from these aliens that we're fighting. Well, a kind of a parasitic life form that's kind of taken over humanity. So we're actually fighting humanity, but they're being controlled by this parasite. Another thing, when we are grazing enemy shots, our shots generate health pickups from the enemy's shield pickups. So this game uses a shield system or life system where we can take 3 hits before we're done for, and it is possible to replenish your health in the stages itself, as long as you're grazing the enemy shots, or you'll also replenish that shot from using a barrier breaker to destroy enemies. So we've been able to fully replenish our health. We have a barrier breaker, and we have our first boss. I did a terrible job dodging there, so. Target inbound. So of course, the main thing we want to do in a fight like this is graze the enemy bullets as much as possible while shooting the core. And we also want to build up our barrier breaker, as it's the way that we can deal the most consistent damage to this particular boss. If, like that, you happen to take fatal damage, you'll be set back to a checkpoint. There aren't a ton of checkpoints in the stages. Basically, the beginning of the stage, and then from like the boss. From the start menu, it's actually possible to restart from the checkpoint or restart from the beginning of the mission, depending on what you want to do. One interesting thing that the restarting it either by death or from the menu will do is it does give you a full barrier break to start the fight with, which is admittedly a nice touch. So these little orbs here are interesting. They'll rise up and then sink into the ocean and fire up a shot. I probably wanted to burn my barrier breaker here. So most of the bosses have like a couple standard patterns. We're basically seeing the main pattern for our first boss, Ashley here. We'll dodge her lock-on again, using like the upward or downward dodge. So the upward and downward dodge has some interesting momentum associated to them. One thing that I'm not a particular fan of is if you use the dodge and dodge up while you're holding down, like say you were moving down but then you suddenly realized you needed to dodge up, it kind of kills the momentum and you barely move. I kind of wish that that wasn't the way that system was like set up, but it's not necessarily a deal breaker, and it's something that I could get used to. But in my mind, when you use a dodge like that, it's supposed to like have the momentum carry on or override your like downward momentum or your upward momentum. So it's just a little bit of like something that, at least for me personally, let's see, it'll take some getting used to. Alright, so we find ourselves fighting the boss for a third time. Not necessarily my best performance, but like that's one of the things is like these bosses, as I mentioned, the grazing kind of almost has a the gameplay itself rather. It's like less the grazing and more just like the whole system itself kind of has like a puzzle nature to it, where it feels like we're trying to best figure out how to like fight these particular bosses. So you're learning their patterns, and sometimes you need to use the barriers with like a really specific precision to avoid taking damage. The third stage boss really comes to mind in that one when you get to him, so just something to keep in mind. So we'll try and build up another barrier here before we get the large orbs. No, we didn't quite. Okay, there. That time we were able to pull it off. One thing that's nice about the barrier breaker is it will deal damage to all enemies on screen, including some that happen to be in the background, and that includes bosses. There will be situations where the bosses we're fighting are not in the foreground with us, but rather in the background. Alright, we should be good with just one more pass here. I don't actually remember where I took damage at this point. So one of the things that I haven't been able to figure out yet in the game itself is, at least on the Steam page, it mentions that based off of your performance, you'll see like basically different facets or even like paths in the game. Basically, like the game is kind of multi-path depending on how well you perform and actions you choose. I haven't really seen the choice to do different actions, so I think it's largely just based on your performance. But having a game that has multi-pathing to it can be a really rewarding and like a great challenge, as if it takes like better performance and getting higher ranks. At that time we got a rank C, so getting like a rank B or a rank A might net different results in future stages. I haven't noticed that yet to this point, but for a game that only has like 6 stages in it, it's nice to see that kind of replayability. So once you complete a stage, you have the ability to either replay it for higher rank, or you can continue to the next mission. As it says here, it saves your mission progress. So there you have it. That basically sums up Risk System, hopefully for your enjoyment. So this is a title that I don't think is going to be everybody's cup of tea, as the mechanics can be a little bit tricky. Bullet grazing isn't always something that everyone enjoys. But for those that do, I think this is a pretty interesting title to give a try out. And as far as the minus flavors are concerned, just the little bit of issues I've had with the dodge controls, I just really feel like the dodge momentum should cancel out your own movement. I do wish that there was a little bit more flexibility in the difficulty, as some of the bosses might get frustrating before you figure out the best way to deal with them. But on the plus sides, there's that really satisfying mechanic of learning how best to utilize the game's dodge mechanic. Like these laser turrets here, for example, we can we got enemy that's trying to shoot us from behind, so that we can build up our meter, use that to both destroy these enemies up front as well as that enemy behind us to deal with. And just those the mechanics can be pretty fun and satisfying. And really, it's the meat of the game, and it's just enjoyable once you master it. I've definitely encountered it with my time with this, some moments where I was just frustrated with the game, but overall this is one that I would recommend if you like that idea of the core mechanic. Alright, that'll just about wrap it up for this week's episode of Shoot 'em Up Saturday. As always, I want to thank you so much for joining me this week, and I look forward to seeing you again next week.